A lot of us don't have this experience that we're told is so common, as women, as racial minorities, whatever, the identity is that we're supposed to be like living in a nightmare and I'm in danger all the time. This rhetoric that really just doesn't feel true to me at all. And whatever, you just get called privileged then. Like, oh, well, I'll just pick out your privilege card and dismiss you with that then. Like suddenly my experience as a woman doesn't matter anymore because, oh, well, you're privileged because you're not Black, or you're privileged because you're not disabled, or you're privileged because you're not like literally homeless.
And
so
life
dismissed.
is full of privileges and disadvantages because in an area where you may be privileged or an area where I may be privileged, I may have a severe disadvantage compared to somebody else. And that's not to say that life is all fair and it all evens out, because that's absolutely not the case. But the answer to privilege is quite literally never to forcefully redistribute somebody else's resources, money, property, time, whatever, to somebody else to make it equitable or equal in some type of way.
Sorry. Privilege, I was about to rail on privilege. Like, do you want to go ahead? Okay. Because the thing is, what I realized about the privilege discussion, first of all, I lived in fear of that label for quite a while in my Tumblr days because it was so obvious that if you were privileged, you were bad. First of all, it was a reason that people used to dismiss your opinion, to dismiss your perspective, which is a terrible feeling. It's a really dehumanizing thing to say your perspective is worth less because you're in this category of people. Right. That is, in some ways, very discriminatory. And it's the same kind of thing of like, I'm dismissing you as an individual because of your group. That's really, really like gross stuff to do to human beings. And then on the other hand, if we're gonna talk about privilege, let's talk about it. So what about pretty privilege? What about the privilege of having good friendships? What about the privilege of having two parents and having a healthy, family life?
Exactly, because
I've you're going to take their resources?
People have said this to my face that I have half white privilege essentially because I have a white parent that I'm more privileged than the average Black person in America. I have no idea if that's true or not, but I think that the majority of like my so-called privilege, maybe even compared to, I don't know if the average Black person, but a good chunk of Black people, is I was raised in a 2-parent household. Like my parents were married my entire childhood. I was raised with my dad in the house. So I feel like that's privilege. And also, if we're really going to talk about privilege, can we talk about how most Americans live better than 90% of the world?
We're all privileged.
The standard of poor in America, like below the poverty level, is still making like $24,000 a year. And that's like below, I think something below that is like poverty. That is rich in the majority of the rest of the developing world.
Yeah. I had this conversation.
A poor person here has a TV and an iPhone. Okay.
Right.
It's very true. I had this conversation with someone last night where I was called privileged and reminded that, I like things are so much harder for other people, which is very true. But one thing we don't consider is that we have 21st century privilege, and capitalism and the free market have unlocked the spirit of innovation to such an extent that our baseline for what is normal is so unbelievably higher than what it has been throughout history. Like we are so incredibly blessed, and that is like the one privilege I really wish people would actually
think about,
living
in
modern times.
I bet we all think about it frequently because that's why we are the way that we are. Because when you realize how much better it is to be destitute, like literally the lowest rung of society today versus, I think it's Naval Ravikant has said this very beautifully, which is like, you take a poor person today and they are still richer and better off than a king, hundreds, like a century ago. Yeah. And it's like, you have antibiotics. Like, I don't care. Everything else.
You will not die of dysentery. Right.